The leading authorities in deep geopolitics, exposing the myths of global warming, vaccinations, and more recently the global financial meltdown. Once you have a look at his DVDs later, you'll see he's done talks on loads of different subjects as well. He's a former oil executive and has more than an insider's view into corporate corruption and how they can influence government policy. Ian Ortring.
I'm going to get this microphone sorted. There. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Is that reasonably clear? Okay, well, thanks for coming back. I know it's a long evening, and it's Friday evening too. I'd actually just like to acknowledge Jim's contribution to what's going on right now, because I mean, as he made the observation when he was being asked on a radio show yesterday, was he doing this for the money? I mean, give me a break. So Jim has put his head above the parapet. I've been able to do what I do in relative obscurity and anonymity. And people tend to only sort of hear my name or find my name when they're actually interested in the sort of stuff that I have to talk about. But Jim started with a name. He's a public personality. So sticking his head above the parapet and coming out into the public arena and talking about the sort of subjects he's talking about has obviously taken a lot of courage. And there's a number of other people who have tried it, and they've been demonized, effectively marginalized, dismissed as cranks. And I have to say that Jim is perfecting the art of handling the radio interview critics. So I think, Jim, I think you're in this for the long haul, right?
I guess so.
Absolutely. So please give a big round of applause. Because we need more people like it. And hopefully what will happen is when people realise what Jim is contributing to this whole arena and this awakening process, then other people will come out, because we know there's others. We know there's others. There are others who know what's occurring, but they haven't yet plucked up the courage to put their career, their consumerist, materialist career on hold, if you like, or even ditch it and come and do what they know to be right. So they offer their support. Most of that's moral support rather than financial, but they at least offer their support and let us know. And there are one or two people who do it in surreptitious ways. Robbie Williams actually has let it be known, and he attends the UFO conference in Laughlin every year. And I'm not going to go down that particular path, but Robbie Williams has certainly let it be known that he certainly questions the whole of the global agenda. But obviously, right now, Take That is far more attractive. I don't know why the music's crap. I didn't say that. Anyway, we're back in Ireland. I'm back in Ireland after doing a short tour of the Republic a few weeks ago, where I gave a couple of talks on the BP oil spill disaster, which I can assure you is a long way from being over. In fact, that's something that we're going to be feeling the effects of for a very, very long time to come. I gave a couple of presentations on that, and then I gave another presentation in Drogheda entitled History Cannot Be Permanently Falsified. And these 3 dates had been arranged for quite some time. And then I heard that Jim was giving a presentation in Belfast. And as I'd asked Jim on a couple of occasions if he'd be interested in giving a presentation at the conferences that I organise in the UK for the Alternative View. And he declined initially because he wasn't yet ready to step out onto the platform. But his talk in Belfast went extremely well. So I asked him if he'd be interested in joining me in Dublin, and I was giving a presentation on Dublin, and obviously with the particular focus on the financial issue. So 2 weeks ago, literally just 2 weeks ago tonight, we did the talk in Dublin at the Ashling Hotel, and as far as I was concerned, at the end of the evening it was a one-off. But it seems that we touched a nerve, because by the time I got home, in fact by the time I was leaving the hotel, Kim was already expressing interest in bringing us up into the northwest here. And by the time I got back to the southwest of England, then we had sufficient interest to organise the tour. So right now we're doing 8 dates. 4 this week, we're in Tullamore tomorrow, and then we're doing another 4 next week. And we're already getting a lot of inquiries about the possibility of coming back later this month. So we've obviously tapped into something which is fantastic, because of what's happening right now, particularly in starting to impact on every individual in one way, shape or form. So more and more people are starting to take an interest, and as I'm sure all of you would attest, then it only takes one card to fall, and then all the rest come tumbling down pretty quickly. For some it's 9/11, for some it's the London bombings, for some it's the financial meltdown. But it starts to open up, a different perspective on everything that's occurring. So, ostensibly, we came to Ireland because Ireland is the focus right now. Ireland is right in the forefront. The Republic is right in the forefront. The test case was supposed to be Iceland, but that didn't quite go to plan, as Jim has already alluded to. So now the focus is on Ireland. And if Ireland capitulates, as unfortunately everybody expects it will, Ireland capitulates, basically the UK is not far behind. Because there is an agenda here that effectively covers the world. But we're going to focus tonight on Ireland because it's right in the forefront in Europe, and then obviously what's planned for Europe. The UK is about 7th in line at the moment, because once Ireland capitulates, they're going for Greece, Portugal, Italy, Spain, and then they'll start to turn their attention on the UK, because as you'll see, the UK is in a extremely precarious position. Thanks to Tony Blair, ostensibly, but Tony Blair did exactly what he was asked to do. That's why he is going to be, at some juncture in the not too distant future, an EU president. Everybody thinks he's out of the frame because he didn't get it first time around, but it was too soon. It was too soon. So what they needed to do was to create the impression by appointing the current incumbent, Rompuy, to create the impression that it's simply an honorary position. It doesn't really have much power. It's just there to chair the meeting. So that by the time Blair's put forward as president, everyone says, well, it doesn't really matter. It's not really a position that has much teeth. Well, once Blair gets in there, you watch what teeth the EU presidency really has. Because Tony Blair, of course, is the epitome of the clinical socio-psychopath. And he can do it with a smile on his face. And I mean, the guy has such an incredible capacity for lying. I mean, there's very few other politicians that can do it with such aplomb. That's why Obama is really failing, because he has to read his scripts. And if a teleprompter fails, he completely loses it. There's a joke in America that says, if you ask Obama what he's going to talk about 5 minutes before he goes onto the platform, he hasn't got a clue. And if you ask him 5 minutes after he's come off the platform what he just talked about, he hasn't got a clue. He reads the prompts. And there's some wonderful YouTube clips which you can find where the teleprompter breaks down and he's totally screwed. Blair was brilliant, because Blair didn't need a prompter. Blair was able to learn the script and was able just to sort of spiel freehand. That's why Blair is the chosen one. And the first clue, by the way, the first clue was that he was going to be a shoo-in for the EU presidency at some juncture was when he converted to Catholicism. Because the EU is a Catholic entity. So just the same as in the UK, it's most unlikely that we would have a Catholic Prime Minister. We can have a Jewish Prime Minister, we can have an atheist, an agnostic, and a Protestant, of course, but not a Catholic. The EU is completely the inverse. And it will never have a Protestant leader. It's going to have a Catholic leader. Tony Blair converting Catholicism enabled him to go into that position. So Jim's done a really excellent job in terms of introducing you to who's really running the world. Jim had this problem last night where we couldn't get the prompter to work. This time it's my turn. And then when this happens, I'm afraid I have to demonstrate the absolute limitations of the male of the species, which is that I cannot do two things at once. I cannot get this to work and talk at the same time. So talk amongst yourselves.
Someone buy it, you can do it.
Here we go. Well, let's try that. Voila. Voila. Who really rules the world? Well, Jim's given you a pretty good insight into that, and I'm not going to get into the detail. But just to talk about the generics here, because this symbol here is extremely important. Extremely important. It's on the $1 bill. It's the Great Seal. But the symbolism signifies separated capstone, the eye and the separated capstone. And what this represents is the knowledge and the wisdom retained by the few, never to be shared with the masses. And anyone who is an initiate, or deemed to be an initiate, or deemed to have access to any of this information, if, God forbid, they start to share it, then effectively they are eliminated. I mean, I talk about this with one particular individual who, in the US, was pretty much saying exactly the same as I was saying in Europe regarding the BP oil spill. But he was an insider. He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, this guy called Matthew Simmons. And on August the 6th, I think it was Sunday, August the 6th, he was taking a break from his television work, and he unfortunately died in his hot tub in Maine, supposedly from a coronary. So, these guys don't mess around. Benazir Bhutto is another one. Benazir Bhutto was eliminated because she let slip in an interview to David Frost that Osama bin Laden had been murdered. And the BBC even tried to cut that piece out of the interview. Because David Frost, of course, being a very safe pair of hands, why do you think David Frost was the chosen one to interview Richard Nixon? He's a safe pair of hands. So when Benazir Bhutto let this slip, he just let it go straight over his head. But Benazir Bhutto put it out there. Of course, it was all over YouTube. There was a big furore when the BBC cut the clip out. So she was taken out. And obviously the list goes on and on and on. These guys believe they can act with complete impunity, because when they take out their own, they work on the basis that the general populace really don't care too much, because they can just get on and do this. So this is the separation here. And it's so important to them that even symbolically they will never allow the capstone to be connected to the pyramid. And back in the millennium, there was going to be a massive concert on the Giza Plateau. I mean, the Egyptian government had booked Jean-Michel Jarre to do one of his light show spectaculars, and the grand finale was going to be a helicopter lowering a golden capstone onto the top of the Pyramid of Cheops, making the pyramid complete again. But the inner sanctum said, oh no you're not. And they shut it down. They told the Egyptian government that if they went ahead with this, then they would find that their aid would be greatly reduced. So the concert didn't go ahead. And there was no way they were going to allow, even symbolically, the capstone to be connected to the pyramid. Now, through history, and I think Jim has adopted an excellent approach in sharing quotes with you from people who have held positions of high office, who have gone onto the public record to acknowledge that there are incredible powers behind the scenes. And many of these people, when they go into high office, they actually have no idea at all, how little autonomy they will have once they actually assume the position. I mean, does anybody here know of Bill Hicks? Yeah, wonderful comedian, of course. Well, Bill Hicks told a story way back in the early 90s. He said, I had this vision that every time a new American president is sworn in on the White House lawn, immediately after he's taken the oath, he's taken down into the basement of the White House and he's shown the real film of what happened at Dealey Plaza, where JFK was assassinated in 1961. He's shown the real film, and they let it sink in for a minute, and then they say, now, Mr. President, any questions? Well, Clark, we've got a situation like that closer to home. Because Gordon Brown, of course, was the Chancellor or Prime Minister in waiting for 11 years, living right next door to Tony Blair. But even though they were that close, geographically, of course, they weren't close personally, and because Tony Blair wasn't a consummate actor and would never let it be known that it wasn't him making the decisions, I believe that when Gordon Brown actually got into number 10, he was totally unprepared for the magnitude of the pressure and the power that would be brought to bear on top of him, even though he was the Chancellor. And a classic of that was that there's actually no record of Gordon Brown ever using the phrase New World Order until January of 2008. And then he was using it in a speech in India. And it's very haunting. I mean, he gives the speech as though he's delivering it, but he doesn't really want to be saying it. But a few months later, I mean, it was just flowing out of him. And in fact, he gave a speech at the Confederation of British Industry in May, which was about 6 weeks before he was actually sort of sworn in as the unelected Prime Minister. And in that speech, he uses the words New World Order, New Financial Order, New Global Order 17 times. So when he gave the speech in India, it sounded as though somebody actually said to him, Gordon, you want to be Prime Minister, you need to start embracing this philosophy. You need to start making it very clear that you are going to buy in to the New World Order. And because the guy wanted to be Prime Minister so bad, of course, he sold his soul. Completely sold his soul. I mean, I believe he's a broken man now. So, but he's just made his first speech on the back benches, hasn't he, since coming out of position. But such is the power. And Woodrow Wilson, the guy who was president when the Federal Reserve was established, and Woodrow Wilson realized that he had effectively sold the American dream to the banksters. Woodrow Wilson said, we have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men.
Beautiful.
Now, you know, he would have known, basically, he would have known that these small groups were connected, were interconnected. And I believe that he would have actually considered some of those people to be not necessarily friends, but, you know, close associates or close advisors. And I'm going to introduce you to one of those people who was an arch manipulator in just a minute. But during the course of the presentation, I'm also going to share some extracts from a document, and I'm going to tell you what the document is at the end of the evening, because it's a really remarkable document. It's incredibly prescient. It's a document that appeared in the public domain as recently as 2002. And in 2002, you know, just 8 years ago, then anybody reading it would have said, oh, this is a complete crock. I mean, this is just a work of fantasy. But here we are, 8 years on, and pretty much, if you go through that document, everything that's in that document is happening, or in the process of happening. And as Jim said, you know, we don't come out on the road to, you know, to preach, or even to tell you that, you know, what we're telling you is the definitive version. You know, this is a very fast-moving arena, and new information is coming into us all the time. And you know, we're working at it full time, and it's tough for us to keep up with everything. But you know, we encourage people to really take things away, take the seeds that we sow, and then use those seeds and do your own research, come to your own conclusion. Because you know, ultimately, the more people are looking at this, I mean, my life has got so much easier since I joined Facebook. You know, because people are feeding up information all the time, and actually, you know, I don't want to get you to think that I'm getting lazy and I just sit there watching Facebook all day. But you know, people are posting stuff on our Facebook pages now, which give us leads that maybe we wouldn't have seen or picked up. So you know, we are using the technology, you know, to maximise the opportunity we have for trawling the information that's out there. You know, we encourage you to do the same. So the first of these quotes: "The truth will be hidden in their face, so close they will not be able to focus on it until it's too late. Oh yes, so grand the illusion of freedom will be, that they will never know that they are our slaves. When all is in place, the reality we will have created for them will own them. This reality will be their prison. They will live in self-delusion. When our goal is accomplished, a new era of domination will begin. Now, Jim referenced a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski, written in 1970, or written in 1969, published in 1970. And it's an incredibly prescient book. But even that book is actually substantially based upon a document that came into the public domain 2 years previously, which is dismissed as another fraudulent document. It's called the Report from Iron Mountain. Again, it's an excellent read. It's incredibly prescient. This is a document that was put together by a right-wing think tank in the early 1960s, just after the Berlin Wall had been put together. It was a group that was pulled together to look at alternatives to war for the controlling the masses. Well, actually, that particular group in the 60s decided that there really wasn't an alternative. War was still the best way to cull the population and feed the economy through creating waste. Because when our goal is accomplished, a new era of domination will begin. Well, I think what we're going to show you, we started to show you tonight, is that these guys believe that new era of domination is this close. This close. We are at a remarkable juncture in our evolutionary process. You know, these guys believe they've absolutely got us where they want us, and they can achieve total subjugation. And they are getting so brazen about it that they are telling us, they are putting what they're going to do in the media. And they're basically saying, you know, we've told you guys, but you are so freaking stupid. You can't pick it up, you can't see what we're doing. We've dumbed you down. The fluoride in the water, the vaccines, the GM foods. You are so compliant. We can actually put in your media, tell you what we're going to do, and you will do nothing. And I'll show you how they do that. The major control that, of course, they've introduced, instead of war, it is economic war. It is war through debt. And you know the definition of mortgage? Mortgage, the grip of death. Mortgage, the grip of death. You see, many times everything's in your face. Tony Blair, when Tony Blair came to power in 1997, his mission was to effectively to destroy the wealth created by the Thatcher years. Okay, I mean, you know, not everybody benefited from the wealth created by the Thatcher years, but nonetheless, certainly she had spread the wealth. When Blair came to power, his task was to get everybody into debt, so that in the belief that we had ended the boom and bust and it was all going to be boom, and then the bubble could be burst at some juncture. I mean, look at what he did with students, like setting up student tuition fees. Because when Blair came to power, basically the majority of students had the opportunity, if they had the capability, they had the opportunity to go to university, and effectively that was paid for by the state. As a nominal contribution based on means testing, etc., etc. But when Blair came to power, changed it all, put in the tuition fees. Don't worry about the tuition fees. Don't worry about where the money's coming from, because we're going to loan it to you. We're going to loan it to you. So not only did they start loaning the money to the students, but they started creating bullshit degree courses, Mickey Mouse degree courses that had absolutely no future whatsoever. So when Blair said, you know, more young people have gone to university under our government than under any previous government, he wasn't lying. But it was deliberate. It was deliberate to create a generation that's in debt. So basically, anybody who's been to university over the last 3 years is probably saddled. I mean, the average debt of a graduate is currently £15,000. Average. And you know, my eldest daughter is 28, and her student debt, she has no idea what it is, because she has no intention of paying it back. That's why she's in Mozambique. Earning £700 a month, and living like a queen. Anyway, so the way this debt is created, both on a microscopic basis and a macroscopic basis, is through a system called Fractional Reserve Banking. Now, you won't find too much written about this in the mainstream media because they don't really want people to understand how it works. So what I'm going to just do over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you the 101 of fractional reserve banking. Okay? It's not the minutiae, but it's pretty much an overview of how fractional reserve banking works. Now, fractional reserve banking is actually mystical. It's incredibly mystical. In fact, it's even more mystical than alchemy. Because with alchemy, you actually need lead, apparently, to be able to turn it into gold. With fractional reserve banking, you need nothing at all. Nothing. So, we start with the central bank, which creates itself out of nothing, thin air. The central bank awards itself, let's say, $1 million. Now, we can give it the benefit and say, well, in this case, it actually has got $1 million worth of gold. But just for example, the Federal Reserve, one of the reasons that Ron Paul is desperately trying to get an audit of the Federal Reserve is because Ron Paul suspects that all the gold supposedly held by the Federal Reserve has gone. And there's a rumour circulating that all the gold, or much of the gold in Fort Knox, is actually gold-painted tungsten bars that are worth marginally less than a gold bullion. So 1 million, let's give them 1 million worth of gold, and they work on the basis now of a fractional reserve rate, and we'll be generous here, they're conservative, of 5 to 1. The central bank then lends to, let's say, the regional banks. So we have Bank A, Bank B, A and B, they're the regional banks. And then the high street banks, in this example, B, C and D. So the central bank needs to get that 5 million, which doesn't really exist, except on a computer screen, but it needs to get that 5 million into the system. So what it does is it lends $1 million basically to each of the regional banks, and then it decides that it's actually going to lend to the high street banks. It doesn't normally happen that way, there's other banks in between here. But what it's done is it's put that 5 million into the system. Now the regional banks are a bit less conservative, so they're operating on a fractional reserve rate of 10 to 1. So the regional banks have converted this 1 million that didn't exist in the first place to 10 million that doesn't exist at all. But it's in the system. So now, this 1 million is converted to 10, this 1 million is converted to 10. Now when it gets interesting, is out of this 10 million, these guys are going to lend the high street banks some of that, and the high street banks are also going to work to a ratio of 10 to 1. So they're going to use this money, and they're going to create 20 million, this bank's going to create 30 million, this going to create 20 million. So from the original 1 million, which probably didn't really exist in the first place, we've now actually got 10, 20, 40, 60, we've got 90 million in the system. And that's just all put out there, and people are told to go spend it. Yeah, don't worry about it, go spend it. The only problem is, they're putting it out there on the basis that one day they're going to get it back. But they're going to get it back with interest. So they put out the money, they put out the capital, and encourage you to borrow it at cheap rates because you think you can make it, convert it into a little bit more money. But they don't put out the interest, so the interest has to come from somewhere. And the interest comes from the common wealth, the wealth of the people or the wealth of the nation. So what we have here is the central bank putting out the loan capital into the country, the generic here, i.e. the country, the state, the country, the people, the country, the corporations, it's generic going into the country. But the central bank wants its loan capital back plus the interest. So unless the nation has a means of creating wealth through things like manufacturing, through things like farming, through things like natural resources like oil and gas or woodland, unless it has a means to create wealth and generate wealth, which means trading obviously with other countries and taking some of their wealth, then unless that is on offer, every year the national wealth is actually going to get smaller. Because the loan capital plus the interest the interest that's going to cripple the country. And each year, the national wealth is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it's in negative. And from that moment onwards, the debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger until the debt exceeds your capability to produce wealth. And where we're at right now is exactly that situation. And once the magnitude of the debt reaches the point where it exceeds a country's capability to produce wealth, it's in a death spiral, an absolute death spiral. And that's the situation that basically much of Europe is in right now. And Ireland, although not necessarily actually the worst case, but the Republic is a country of 4.7 million people. And these guys believe that because it's 4.7 million people, they can achieve what they want to achieve here with relatively little resistance. They might get a bit more resistance if they tried it on one of the bigger countries first, as we've seen in Greece and in France. So this is what's happening, and what I'm going to do for the next sort of hour or so is take you through a little bit of how that's been allowed to happen, and then take a look at just maybe some of the things that we can do to recover this situation, because it doesn't have to be this way. But these guys are working on the basis that nobody has the capability to see the alternatives. Because those people who do have the capability to see the alternatives, they've got their snout so far in the trough, they're all bought and paid for, and they will not run the risk of losing their lifestyles. They've sold their souls, absolutely sold their souls. Now, that said, I do believe there's a lot of good people in government, in the civil service, in the police, in the military. And when the time is appropriate, when the appropriate leadership emerges, then I believe that those people will actually help swing around the situation. But until such time as something occurs which brings that about, then this is the situation we're in right now. So basically we're in this situation right now, around here in Europe. All the countries are in pretty much this situation, with the exception really of Germany and France. Now, Woodrow Wilson, I said that he would have considered one of these arch manipulators to be one of his close confidants. And there's a guy I'm going to introduce you to, and I'm pretty sure that there's perhaps at best one or two people in the room that have heard of this guy, because I'd never heard of him. I mean, I was into some really deep research before I stumbled across this guy. It's a guy called Bernard Baruch. Anybody heard of this guy? Yeah? Okay, that's because you were at my presentation last night. That doesn't count. Bernard Baruch. And unless you've read A.K. Chesterton's book, which is actually where I came across him, A.K. Chesterton wrote a book in the 1960s called The New Unhappy Lords. And it is an incredibly prescient book. A.K. Chesterton foresaw exactly what was happening in Europe. Now, he was a Brit of the time. I mean, he was a product of the British Empire. So, he was waxing lyrical about the fact that the British Empire was being broken up. But this is the guy who was the architect behind that. But A.K. Chesterton had the foresight to be able to see exactly where it was going. So although the book was written 40 odd years ago, then it is a great read in terms of coming across an individual that actually could see what's happening. And everybody said, "Oh, this is just ridiculous." No, I mean, the guy is on another planet here. This guy was known as the park bench consultant, because he didn't have an office per se. He basically had a bench in the parks around Washington, and people would go to him. People would go out of their offices and they would go walking to him, and he would basically tell them what it was they needed to be doing. This was the guy who was effectively the go-between between the inner sanctum of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of this planet, a group that a guy called Dr. John Coleman, who researched this through the 80s and 90s, he wrote a book in 1986 called The Committee of 300, and he refers to the inner sanctum as the Olympians. This guy undoubtedly was in direct contact with that inner sanctum. He was the predecessor to the likes of Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. When this guy died, when Brzezinski and Kissinger came into the frame. This is the guy who forced Woodrow Wilson, persuaded, I'll be generous, to set up the Federal Reserve. This is the guy who made sure that the Warburgs, Max and Paul, were financing both sides of the First World War to make sure it was a bloody good war. Max on the side of the Germans and Paul on the side of the British and subsequently the Americans. This is the guy who set the reparations level at Versailles for the German nation at 360 billion Deutschmarks, an impossible sum at the time. I mean, it was ultimately, it was even deemed to be so outrageous that ultimately it was reduced to 240 billion Deutschmarks. This is the guy who instructed, effectively, the Federal Reserve to withdraw 30% of the financial resources from the American economy to create the initial crash of 1929, but it wasn't the initial crash that wiped out the wealth of the middle classes. It was the deceit, i.e. convincing everybody that the crash was over, everything was well on the way to recovery, and then in 1933, boom, pull the rug out and literally take everybody's wealth. Now in 1932, he was the guy who instructed the then President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to confiscate all privately held gold. The US is still the only country in the world to have confiscated the gold of its private citizens, which is one of the reasons why US citizens, when they buy gold, they do it as discreetly as possible, and they certainly keep it in places where the banks ain't going to know anything about it. This is the guy who manipulated the events that led to America coming into the First World War, i.e. the manipulation of Pearl Harbor. And this is the guy who was the architect of breaking up the British Empire, and yet nobody's ever heard of him. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. And now, of course, it's ancient history, because there's really fewer and fewer people who are alive during that particular period. He was also the architect of what needed to happen in the longer term. The breaking up of the British Empire was extremely important, and of course he made sure it happened as soon as possible after the end of the Second World War. He was also a Zionist, in the true sense of the word. He was a student of Herzl, and he was the guy who was driving the ultimate establishment of the State of Israel. I'm not too sure yet of his participation or how direct his involvement was in establishing the Balfour Treaty, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if his hand wasn't in there somewhere. So a quite remarkable guy. And his ultimate dream was then, beyond the British Empire, was establishing the means of his moving towards the one world government. Now, these guys work in very, very long-term agendas. I mean, this is my specialist area, deep geopolitics, which is looking at their long-term goals. These guys work on the basis of 100, 200, 500, 1,000-year agendas. And they also work on the basis that the nature of their game is to keep the masses locked into short-term agendas. You know, most people can't actually think much beyond the next salary check, and there's an increasing number of people who can't think beyond the next episode of Coronation Street. And whilst they're focused on that kind of short time scale, these guys can plan their game with impunity. And what he was forecasting or proposing, and every part of his agenda was leading to, was the creation, ultimate creation of the one world government. And so, although he's no longer on this mortal coil, or not in that physical body anyway, these guys have a unique belief system that bears no relationship to any of the orthodox belief systems on the planet. I actually discussed this in a presentation that I made 4 years ago called The Hidden Agenda, where I explore and explain the belief systems that these guys hold and the reason that they perpetrate the agendas that they do. So, Baruch's dream was to establish the one world government, and his strategy, his proposed strategy, was through regionalising the economies. And of course this is exactly what's happening, because That is what Europe looked like at the end of the Second World War. So here we are, that after Second World War, which is what, 65 years. We're 65 years beyond the end of the Second World War, when we had 27 sovereign nations. And the start of this breakdown occurred obviously on March 15th, 1957, when the Treaty of Rome was signed. And in a very, very short space of time, we have gone from that to that. So what Hitler couldn't achieve by force has been achieved by stealth. And I have a document dated 1971, and it's marked for cabinet eyes only. This is the Edward Heath government. And in that document it says that once the British people agree, and agree was in inverted commas, to Britain joining the common market, the role of national government will be to prevent the people from realising the magnitude with which power is handed over to the European government. So the Heath government knew right from the outset that basically getting everybody in, or getting Britain into the common market, was effectively the start of the transfer of power. Now whilst this was going on, it's been going on elsewhere as well. Because today we have the League of African Nations, the League of Arab Nations, the Asia Pacific Economic Community, the Southeast Asia Economic Community, and since 2005 the legislation has been in place in Canada, the US and Mexico to establish the North American Union. Now, as Jim rightly says, these guys are behind schedule right now for a number of reasons. Not least that they wouldn't be able to pull it off because they haven't managed to manipulate the people yet to embrace the idea of a North American Union. But you know, they're doing everything they possibly can to bring it about. There are players here who are desperate for it to happen for a number of reasons. But one of the major reasons is because they want to be able to bring Mexicans into the US military. Because they will create the North American military and they will be able to get the cannon fodder from south of the Rio Grande. Because the young American men are starting to realise that you know, if you actually like to keep your body in one piece, then you know, probably not the smartest move to join up to the US military. But the Mexicans, they can probably be got for you know, quite a lot less, and they're more expendable. So moving on, but they're behind schedule. But you know, ultimately, initially they had a game plan which was to combine the North American Union with the European Union and call it the North Atlantic Union by 2014. They've now basically acknowledged that that's too aggressive, so they're working on a timescale now of 2022. I mean, these guys don't really care, actually, how quickly they achieve something, in most cases. They work on the process of gradualism, which means that they will take 3 paces forward, gently, and then when there's a public reaction, they'll go, oh, and take a pace back. Let things settle down a bit, then take another 3 paces forward, public reaction, oh, back off. And this is what's going on all the time. It goes on, I mean, give you a clue. The issue of eugenics. Baroness Warnock was quoted in the British media, what would it be now? A little over a year ago. Baroness Warnock stated that those with senile dementia have a duty to die. That was the headline. Go Google it. What they were doing was they were testing the water for euthanasia. Because these guys ultimately have the goal, and they don't want the useless eaters, to use the phrase of Henry Kissinger. And so what they're doing is pushing the boundaries. They're seeing how far they can push it. And then they'll take a pace back. By the way, I told my dad, I said, Dad, look, I know you don't like the idea of a nursing home. Don't worry, you are never going to go in a nursing home. And he went, oh, why? Can I come and live with you? I said, no, you're going on a cruise ship. Because I've calculated it's a damn sight cheaper to put my dad on a cruise ship and send him off around the world where he's going to get the best of attention, probably, than put him in a nursing home. In fact, the cruise ship works out at about £500 a month cheaper. Why don't the bloody governments do that? Instead of creating the, you know, get a cruise ship, put them on a cruise and let them enjoy their later years. It's cheaper than a nursing home. Check it out. Anyway, the next stage of the game is to merge the North American Union with the European Union and then to move all of the other economic unions under the same umbrella, under the UN banner initially. By this time it won't be called the UN, it'll be like the World Federation or something of that ilk. Because the reason they have to change the name, by the way, is because the vast majority of people in America think that the UN is for everybody else. That the UN does not apply to America. I mean, it's a wonderful scam. Now this logo here is the logo of the World Bank. And Jim referenced a book that I absolutely endorse as essential reading, The Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Because John Perkins' job, working for the World Bank, was to go and get developing nations, and particularly those developing nations that had natural resources, was to go get them into debt. And John Perkins knew that if he was unsuccessful in seducing that third world leader into buying into his infrastructure schemes, and i.e. encouraging the third world country leader to effectively take on a whole bunch of debt to the World Bank, then that world leader would be taken out of the equation, normally in an aeroplane crash. It's an excellent book. John Perkins was bought off by the World Bank. He was given effectively a $1 million a year contract to do nothing. All he had to do for nearly 20 years was be an expert witness every now and again. But after 9/11, he realised that he could no longer keep silent, and that was when he wrote the book.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive. He's, but you see, they're trying to demonise him because what he's done is he now spends a lot of time, down in South America, and he's written a number of books on shamanic practices, and so they try and demonise him and marginalise him now as sort of part of the New Age construct. But his book, certainly The Economic Hitman, is truly outstanding. The World Bank has as its henchman the World Trade Organization, which of course has nothing at all to do with trade, and the World Health Organization, which should probably be named the World Sickness Organization. Because the role of the World Health Organization is to keep the planet in permanent sickness. Because the World Health Organization is the organization of the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry, in 2002, and I'm going to use 2002 because that was before the invasion of Iraq and before the rapid increase in oil prices, but in 2002, the profits of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies were greater than the combined profits of the other 490 companies on the Fortune 500. The pharmaceutical industry has a very, very simple business agenda, and that is that every human life form is a potential revenue stream from the moment of conception to the moment of death. And the sooner that they can get that life form hooked on the pharmaceuticals, then obviously the better they like it. And what we see, of course, is a very aggressive pharmaceutical industry. The HPV vaccine that is now effectively being forced on all 13-year-old schoolgirls was introduced at the behest of GlaxoSmithKline, and the financial controller of GlaxoSmithKline was sitting on the board of Ofsted, driving through that agenda. And of course, there's money, it's a license to print money. The fact that every 13-year-old schoolgirl is going to have this vaccine, say nothing of the effects of it, and Jim has already touched on that. Now, all the countries in the dark blue are countries that are fully signed up to the World Trade Organization, which basically means the World Trade Organization works fundamentally the same way as the EU. So what they do is they don't actually issue laws, but what they do is they issue regulations and directives. And a regulation means that every World Trade Organization country is expected to implement that regulation, whatever that might be, at the earliest possible opportunity. A directive means, okay, you can go through the charade of making it look as though you're making the decision at the national level, but we need you to get it in there by a set timescale, 5 or 10 years or whatever. And anybody who doesn't follow these regulations and directives, then they are fined. And I'll give you an example of that: growth hormone contaminated beef. The World Trade Organization has decreed that growth hormone contaminated beef is completely healthy. If you ever want to see the effects that it has on cows, go Google Posilac, which is the name of the Monsanto drug, which is the growth hormone. And it's Posilac, posilac, increase in the lactation. It causes phenomenal deformities to the udders of cows, and it was developed to increase the milk production in the cows. But the farmers are now, the dairy farmers are now realising that, yeah, it does, on a short-term basis, it increases the milk production, but it reduces the life expectancy of the cow. So then they also discovered that if you give it to the beef herd, then it beefs them up. And this drug, of course, finds its way into the human body. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that in Texas, like, everybody's obese, because it's a state that has beef as it's part of its diet on almost a daily basis. I can vouch for that. I lived there for 3.5 years. And that's why you got shops there, big and tall, which specialise in dealing with the oversized gentlemen. I went in there once and they said, "I'm sorry, sir, I think you're in the wrong shop." I said, "Oh, thank you." And they said, no, you fit one of the criteria, but not the other. Go back to that document I was referring to, the next quote from it here. "We will make them kill each other when it suits us. We will keep them separated from the oneness of dogma and religion, as a Bible of dogma and religion. We will control all aspects of their lives and tell them what to think and how. We will guide them kindly and gently, letting them think they are guiding themselves. We will foment animosity between them through our factions. We will guide them kindly and gently, letting them think they are guiding themselves." I mean, this is the EU treaty. National government does not really exist anymore in the EU at all. It's a charade. Basically, all the legislation is coming down from Brussels, and it's effectively rubber stamped at the national level. When the EU treaty was signed last year, there are effectively 97,000 EU laws that are in the process of being rubber stamped by Whitehall. The only reason they couldn't go straight into law is because Whitehall didn't have the human resources, the commodity, to rubber stamp them quick enough. These laws don't even go through Parliament anymore. They just come straight out of Brussels and then straight into the system. And the other factor is, the big factor, is that in the UK we are no longer under common law. Because of the EU treaty, we are under Napoleonic law. The fundamental difference here, common law means that basically you're innocent of anything you are accused of until you are proven to be guilty, as deemed by 12 of your peers. Napoleonic law means that you're guilty of anything you're accused of until you have been stripped of all your resources in trying to prove yourself to be innocent. And it's the same way with products. Under common law, everything is legal until it is specifically banned. Under Napoleonic law, everything is illegal until it is formally sanctioned as being legal. And this is the way the corporations will kill off the entrepreneur. I'm already starting to do it. Because as an entrepreneur, you can put a product into the market and that's it. And provided it's not going to cause anybody any harm, then the product is fine to sell. The way we are moving is that products will not be able to go into the market until they are formally sanctioned. And of course the licensing and approval procedures will be so outrageously expensive that the only way in which they can go into the market is through the corporations. So corporatism at its worst. And we will keep them separated from the oneness by dogma and religion. We will make them kill each other when it suits us. I think more and more people over the last few years on the mainland have become to appreciate the magnitude of establishment manipulation in the Troubles. And I mean, I think that nobody on the mainland is particularly proud of the magnitude of the manipulations in keeping the Troubles going, because it suited the establishment to keep the Troubles going.
Excuse me, Ian, just on a matter of geopolitical, the mainland of where?
Mainland,
This is the mainland.
It's a very good point.
The island of Ireland is as big as England.
And when I'm in,
we're not Tory Island.
When I'm in England, the mainland is Europe.
Yeah.
So everything's relative. We will recruit some of their own to carry out our plans. We will promise them eternal life, but eternal life they will never have, for they are not one of us. The recruits will be called initiates and will be indoctrinated to believe false rites of passage to higher realms, i.e. 32nd degree Freemasons. That is the false realm. These guys believe that 33 and above are the real realms. Members of these groups will think they are one with us, never knowing the truth. They must never learn this truth, for they will turn against us. For their work they will be rewarded with earthly things and great titles, but never will they become immoral and join us. Never will they receive the light and travel the stars. They will never reach the higher realms, for the killing of their own kind will prevent passage to the realm of enlightenment, but this they will never know. It's an astonishing document. It's an astonishing document. And as I'm going to share the source of that with you, and I'm going to encourage you to go and read that, the whole document itself. Not a long document, but I do encourage you to go read it yourself. But let's take a look at what's happening in the financial arena, because I can absolutely nail down to a very simple equation as to why we are in the financial mess that we're in. Okay, so there it is. You got that? Yep. Got it in one. Well, this is an algorithm that was developed about 25 years ago by a guy called Dr. David Lee, obviously Chinese, but he's an actuarial economist, and basically he's full-time at Harvard, so he's working in academia. And he came up with this equation basically for actuaries. Now, an actuary is a guy who sort of effectively calculates the future value of funds, or if he has a target for a future value, he calculates what investment needs to be done over the next few years to be able to achieve that particular goal. Well, David Lee basically used the fundamental equation that actuaries use to bring it into mainstream finance. And because it was pretty incomprehensible even to established economists, the whole thing got out of hand. So here's David Lee, and basically what his equation did was it created this new market which many people who've been in the financial arena for 25, 30, 40 years have no idea how this works. But you know, it was like the emperor has no clothes. Because they were being told by the young bucks that this could bring the banks enormous wealth, enormous profits. And these guys didn't, the older guys, the more conservative guys, didn't want to be seen to be, you know, the stuck in the mud, the Luddite, and so they gave these young guys the free hand. And of course what was happening, that the young bucks were taking advantage of all this money, this fake money flooding into the system. And then they were creating these derivatives and the credit default swaps, these things that are known as exotic financial transactions. Exotic financial transactions. And there's a guy called Felix Salmon writing in Wired about 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, and he said, but this is a bit like shutting the door after the horse has bolted, because the downturn had already happened. He said this is a formula for disaster. Absolute disaster. But I mean, even in 2009, even at the start of 2009, when you could see exactly what was about to happen, the banks still kept saying, no, we can get our way out of this. All we've got to do is just pump big money into the system. Which of course just got everybody, on the microscopic level and the macroscopic level, more and more into debt. Now, Australia, which is actually in quite a reasonable financial position, there's a program where they were trying to explain the reason why Europe had got itself into this outrageous debt spiral. And I just want to show you a short clip from a sketch that was on that program.
Roger.
That's your name?
Roger.
Good. And what do you do, Roger?
I'm a financial consultant.
Consultant, eh?
Roger,
Yeah,
yes.
terrific. And Roger, how's business at the moment?
Not bad, thank you. Been a bit quiet lately.
How do you mean lately?
Since the war, been a bit quiet.
Fair enough. Okay, Roger, your special subject tonight is the economies of the European community. Your time starts now. Best of luck.
Thank you.
How much does Greece owe, Roger?
$367 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Mostly to the other European economies.
Correct. How much does Ireland owe?
$865 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Other European economies, mostly.
Correct. How much do Spain and Italy owe?
$1 trillion each.
Correct. Who to?
Mainly France, Britain and Germany.
Correct. And how are Germany, France and Britain going, Roger?
Well, they're struggling a bit, aren't they?
Correct. Why?
Because they've lent all these vast amounts of money to other European economies that can't possibly pay them back.
Correct. So what are they going to do?
They're going to have to bail them out.
Correct. Where are they getting the money to do that, Roger?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
How much does Portugal owe?
Hang on a minute. What was the answer to that earlier question?
Just keep answering the questions, Roger. Where is Portugal going to get the money it owes to Germany if Germany can't get back the money that it lent to Italy?
Just a minute. What was the answer to the previous question? The question was, how can broke economies lend money to other broke economies who haven't got any money because they can't pay back the money the broke economy lent to the other broke economy and shouldn't have lent it to them in the first place because the broke economy can't pay it back?
You're wasting very valuable time, Roger. How much money does Spain owe to Italy?
$41 billion, but where are they going to get it?
Correct. What does Italy owe to Spain?
$27 billion, but they haven't got it, they're broke.
Correct. How can they pay each other if neither of them has any money?
They're going to get a bailout, aren't they?
Correct. And where's the money coming from for the bailout?
That's what I'm asking you.
Correct. Why are people selling the European currency and buying the US dollar?
Because the US economy is so much stronger than the European economy.
Correct. Why is that, Roger?
Because it's owned by China.
Correct. And very well done. And after that round, you've lost $1 million.
I've lost $1 million. I thought you said well done.
Yes, well done. You've only lost $1 million. That's an extraordinary performance, Roger.
Only lost $1 million.
Very well done.
And that's quite good, is it?
That's excellent.
Sell everything immediately. Quickly.
Every number that guy mentioned there is absolutely correct. You know, and in terms of who owes whom what, and really they were just obviously trying to express the complete idiocy of the situation. But of course it is deliberate, as you heard Jim quote David Rockefeller said, we are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the new world order.
Never.
Yeah. Well, these guys believe that that is the case. They absolutely believe it's the case. Public opinion will be led to adopt without knowing it the proposals that we dare not present to them directly. All the earlier proposals will be in the new text, but will be hidden and disguised in some way. What was already difficult to understand will become utterly incomprehensible, but the substance has been retained. This was a statement made by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing immediately after Ireland voted no to the EU treaty. And basically what he was saying here was that basically, it's going to be the same fundamental document. Of course, Angela Merkel admitted it was the same basic document, as did many other people. But the way in which it was obfuscated was so great that they believed that people could be persuaded to vote yes. And last year I was invited by a guy in Dublin to give a series of talks on the EU. And if I hadn't actually visited Dublin myself at that time, I would never have believed the magnitude, the enormity of the deceit and deception in the mainstream media, and of course the phenomenal NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming used on the lampposts, on the bus shelters. I mean, it was incredible, absolutely incredible. And here was an article in the Irish Independent. Families struggle to cope with debt surge. The no to Lisbon will deepen our economic crisis, experts warn. Well, they might have been right, but of course what they didn't say was that actually a yes to Lisbon will deepen them a damn sight further. So, not exactly lying, but being economic with the truth. Another one. Cost of national debt to soar to 210 million on a no vote. What they didn't say was cost of national debt to soar to $1 trillion on a yes vote, which it pretty much is. Rejection of Lisbon will hit families in the pocket. One article I found I think this was in the Irish Daily Mail actually, this is all the politics of fear at its worst, but it was the only article I found in that period that was offering any kind of balance. The media was absolutely loaded with articles promoting the yes vote. But, having said that, there's certainly a hell of a lot of people in the UK who do not believe that the people of the Republic actually voted yes. I think it was close. I think they did a hell of a job with their marketing, but I think it was close enough to be manipulated. And, in the UK, the votes are being manipulated in every election. Not all the votes, but a classic is the 2005 election, where at the height of his unpopularity, Tony Blair's winning margin increased, as did Jack Straw. Jack Straw, Foreign Secretary at the time, representing an ostensibly Muslim constituency, and his margin increased. There's no way, absolutely no way. Postal votes. Postal votes is the method by which voting is manipulated in the UK. Having got everybody into debt, and the worst case scenario is people were buying property in the mid-90s when it was actually at its sort of cheapest in terms of relation to salaries. So people were buying properties at, I mean, I got one example. A guy bought a property at 40,000 in 1996. But then through 2003 onwards, when the housing market was allegedly in boom mode, people were encouraged to increase their mortgages, to take out mortgage because of the alleged increased value of their property. And in the worst case, there's a guy near where I live, he bought his property for 40,000 in 1996. By early 2007, his mortgage was £260,000. He was still in the same house. But the reason it was 260,000 was because when the house was valued a few months previously, the house was valued at £350,000. So the banks thought nothing of lending him the extra cash. Now what was happening, he wasn't alone, there was many others doing the same thing. But of course what that was effectively doing, it was creating money, extra money that didn't really exist in the first place, to go into the economy. So the boom mode was complete smoke and mirrors. And here, this is an article actually from 18 months ago now. So, house price slump may last a decade. Actually, it may even last a lot longer than that. Nearly half of all homeowners have no cash for food and utility bills after paying their monthly mortgage bill. And this is 18 months ago. And it's going to get worse. Because anybody here in the room over the age of 50 will remember when mortgage rates were 15%. And what's happened is, back in the late 70s, when mortgage rates hit 15%, there was an absolute cap. No responsible borrower would lend an individual more than 3 times their income. Today we have situations where people have been lent money on multiples of 5 and 6 times their income. We have situations where people have been lent 120% of the value of a property. And as the value of property slumps, and as interest rates rise, basically we're going to be in a world of foreclosure. Around 53,000 people are expected to lose their homes this year because they cannot keep up mortgage repayments. In the US, go Google tent cities. Tent cities. Because in the US, if a family default on their mortgage for 1 month, then they're out. The magnitude of debt in the UK, this is from the Independent in July. This is officially the size of the UK's public debt, 903 billion. But it emerged yesterday, this is how much we really owe, a toxic legacy for our children and grandchildren. £3.8 trillion. 3.8 trillion. What that means here is, look, the true scale of Britain's national indebtedness was laid bare by the Office for National Statistics yesterday, almost £4 trillion, or 4,000 billion. About 4 times higher than previously acknowledged. So who knows that this is really the truth either? Look at it here. This is what is completely outrageous. Absolutely completely outrageous. For the as yet unborn, it will leave future taxpayers with an additional burden of £200,000 each over their lifetimes to pay for public services enjoyed by this and previous generations. Even with current plans to reduce the deficit, the tax bill will still be as high as £150,000 over the life of somebody born in 2011. So in other words, our children and grandchildren, not born yet, because of gross incompetence at best, deliberate manipulation at worst, future generations are being born into a lifetime of debt slavery. Because if they have a burden of £200,000, assuming a 40-year working life, it means that somehow they have got to pay, before any of the services in their lifetime, but they've got to be basically paying £5,000 a year in tax to pay off the debt that was incurred by our generation. I mean, this is unsustainable, completely and utterly unsustainable. I mean, the currencies have to go into meltdown. So what we're looking at, but they're already realising it's not enough. And that's why countries like the UK, I mean, it was no coincidence, Ireland, the Republic, and the UK announced on the same day that they were going to sell off their national forestry lands. Because they'd been told that that's what they had to do. And Ireland, of course, has been manipulated into literally giving away its natural resources. As Jim rightly said, the proper management of the hydrocarbons off the southwest and west coast of Ireland could create a situation where Ireland could effectively be self-sufficient in a very short number of years. But what's happening right now is the oil companies, Shell ostensibly, are calling the shots. Shell are literally telling the Irish government how much they will or will not pay in taxation from the profits they make from the production of the southwest coast. It should be the other way around. It should be the government telling the oil company how much profit they can take. Because the vast majority of the benefit should be the national resource. You know, there's a move afoot in Europe for everybody to withdraw their money from the banks on December the 7th, which also just so happens to be the day of the Irish budget.
What money?
What money? Well, get in there quick. You need to get down there fast, because there ain't enough money in the banks for everybody. Now, you know, if you do decide to participate in that program, then, you know, basically, if you have liquidity, you definitely need to be doing something with it other than leaving it in fiat currency. And that is this. You need to be looking at getting into something secure, or more secure, something like gold. Why do you think gold has done this over 10 years? Because those people who work in the financial arena knew what was happening. They could see what was happening. There was no boom between 2003 and 2007. There was no boom at all. It was smoke and mirrors. It was a magician's trick. Because the way in which you calculate a boom is you put the stock market and the property market against the price of gold. And then you turn it flat, well, you turn it so that the gold line is flat. If the stock market and the property market are still going up after you turn the gold line flat, then there is a boom. If, once you turn the gold line flat, property and the stock market are doing that, there was a smoke and mirrors exercise going on. And that's exactly what occurred here. Pure. What was going on? We're going into gold. So we got a situation where Gordon Brown was instructed to sell the UK's gold reserves at $250 an ounce in the immediate months before 9/11. He was instructed to sell it to decimate Britain's wealth when it was absolutely known that this was going to be effectively what occurred in the aftermath. So here we are today. Gold is at $1,350 odd an ounce. I haven't checked the price today, but about $1,350 an ounce. But look at what it's done over the last 60 days. This, you know, gold in August just dropped below 1,200. Here it is today at 1,350 or so. 1,350. So basically, there's been what, a 13% increase in the value of gold in the space of just 60 days. What do you get on the bank? What interest do you get on the bank account right now? 1%, 1.5%, 2% at best. Yeah. And of course you will never find any articles in the mainstream media about gold. Never. Because they don't want people to know actually how easy it is to access the gold markets, how easy it is to trade gold, because they need your money in the banks where they can abuse it. No, we have to do questions at the end, and I'm going to get through it. We'll have time for questions, I promise you. So, you take a look at this for yourself. You go to kitco.com, K-I-T-C-O, kitco.com. That is the gold industry's Bible, daily Bible, real-time gold prices. You can see exactly what it's at. You never buy gold on the high street, by the way. So don't be tempted just to walk outside. It's a specialist market. But when the monies are taken out the bank, this is going to fly. It's going to go high. Silver arguably has more upside than gold. Economists in the US have calculated that if if all currency was truly backed by gold, the price of gold today would be $20,000 an ounce. Now, just to put the magnitude of the degree with which the currency is truly fiat, the combined debt of the US and the UK alone, just those two countries, is greater than the total amount of currency in the world today. So this is why we are in a situation that's completely unsustainable. Ireland is the focus, but I do it lightheartedly, but this guy, I'm not surprised he's going out partying, because he knows he has sold Ireland down the proverbial swanny. I think when the people of Ireland realise the magnitude of, at best, the incompetence, but more realistically the deceit and the treason that this guy has committed, then this guy probably better go to the same place as some of the other people that have disappeared from public view. A drunken premier playing right into the hands of the EU. Now, I told you earlier that these guys actually do tell us what they're doing. They put it out there so that, because part of their belief system is they have to tell us what they're doing, because when we do nothing, they take that as a mandate to go ahead and pursue their agenda. So this was actually from a Fuller article, and the full headline was, "Will Irish Meltdown Hit Fragile Recovery? Fragile UK Recovery?" Well, buried in this article here, around about here, is the important paragraph. And the technique that's used is the important paragraph is buried about 3 or 4 paragraphs in a long article. But the whole idea is that you read it, but then by the time you get to the end of the article, you've forgotten the significance of that particular paragraph. Well, here's the paragraph. So, economists are referring to words such as Armageddon and apocalypse, blah, blah. But here is the worst of it. The EU chiefs not only think Ireland's crisis will turn into a national death spiral, they may secretly be hoping it will. No, again, they know it will. Brussels knows that the further Ireland and other troubled Eurozone countries sink into financial disaster, the greater the excuse the Eurocrats can find to achieve one of their long-standing ambitions to take control of national budgets. Because they know that once they've got control of the national budget, that's it, gotcha. Because you ain't ever going to get it back. And once again, let's actually rub the nose in it. Let's tell the Irish people what's happening. The man who's now running Ireland in the Irish Daily Mail. The 15 billion euro. At last our politicians have told us how much we are going to pay for the bankers and developers' folly. And holy God, is it going to hurt. But do you care? No, of course you don't. Not you, but... do you care? No. And they say, EU Commissioner who gave Brian Lenihan his understanding. Another phrase, we used to have those kind of meetings in the oil industry. We called them alignment meetings. And you had them when you had a rogue manager who was pursuing a different philosophy than the one you wanted him to. So you had an alignment meeting, which basically meant you slapped him around the head until he came into line. But that's exactly what's happening here. And Ollie Rehn, this Finn, this Eurocrat, is effectively the guy running Ireland right now. It's not even Ollie Rehn, of course. It'll be his team of economists, globalist economists, who will be giving him his script, and him obviously passing it on to Lenihan. This is going to cause Ireland to lose its commissioner. So ultimately Ireland is going to have zero say, because Germany and France have already stated categorically that those countries that have really screwed up their economy big time are going to lose the right to have a commissioner. So basically Ireland is on the brink of just becoming, you know, like a county within the EU. But I mean, here's the, the reality. The EU is on a completely other planet. I mean, this is from the Daily Express a few days ago. But let me show you, even I think this is the Sun. Yeah, this is the Sun. You suck. This had to be the Sun, didn't it, really? How could I ever think that it wasn't? But, quite remarkably for the Sun, once again, it is a classic case of the Sun putting out the detail, knowing that probably only about 1 in 500 Sun readers will even bother to read this article, but it's out there. It's in the public domain. Nobody could ever argue that they weren't putting the information into the public arena. But let's look at the detail. So here's Brussels budget gets a 5.9% boost. A 5.9% boost. So basically every country in Europe is being told it's going to have to accept austerity measures. Pensions are being cut, healthcare is being cut, employment opportunities are being cut. We're seeing part of the division being created by the demonisation of those on benefits. I mean, this is a complete crock. I mean, we're seeing the demonisation of people on benefits at the same time as employment opportunities are being removed. But it's being created deliberately to create division within society. But if everybody else is expected to make cuts, here, Brussels budget gets a 5.9% boost. Look at the detail, how the axe is falling across Europe. I mean, look at Ireland. The national debt is 77.3% of GDP. 77.3%. The UK is not in much better shape. It's 62.1%. Portugal, 85.8%. The reason they're going after Ireland first is because it's a smaller community. Spain, 64.9%. I mean, even Germany, 78.8%. And that's considered to be, pretty good in Germany, because they've still got ostensibly manufacturing and natural resources. The rest of Europe has basically sold off its manufacturing. It's outsourced it to China or wherever. Greece, 124.9%. So Greece is in terminal spiral, and once you go above 100, it's fundamentally irrecoverable until you do something completely different. And that, 48.5%. So in Ireland, cuts, public sector pay cuts, and of course a significant number of people in Ireland, a very high percentage of population, are on the public sector payroll. Jobs Acts, child benefits / tax raises. I mean, no wonder the all-military leave is being cancelled around the budget period, and all the Irish police or Garda are having specialist training in riot control. And meanwhile, he's the guy, by the way, who's one of the architects about bringing this about. And this is from the front cover of the Sunday Times magazine a little over a year ago. This is a guy called Lloyd Blankfein, who in that article stated that he is doing the work of God. Well, I've got to tell you, he ain't not got a mind. But he's not doing too bad out of it, you see. He's had a couple of good years. He had a bad year in 2008, because he only earned about $38 million. 2007, 67.9 million. 2009, 64.9 million. And I certainly believe that these guys had some inside knowledge about what was going to happen in the Gulf of Mexico. So what we're creating here is a world of pain. Absolute world of pain. And even symbolically, we're being... The NLP, if you like, is all about, we should just cut our throats and slash our wrists and end it now. I mean, when I landed at Dublin Airport the other day, I went down the steps towards the baggage reclaim, and I thought, I've got to walk back up the steps, because out the window was this sculpture. And I thought, this just epitomises, for me, what the media campaign is trying to do to the Irish people. It's actually trying to get them to just hunker down, going, please, Mum, please don't hit me, please don't hit me anymore. And to do nothing. To just go and curl up in a corner. And then I went down the stairs, I went into the baggage reclaim Saw that. EU, non-EU, no return. I thought, oh God, this is incredible. You know. Mayor Ansel Rothschild said, "Let me issue and control the nation's money, and I care not who writes its laws." You know, the Irish Parliament. I mean, like I said, Britain's not far behind here. You know, already the vast majority of legislation being introduced in the UK does not come through Parliament. You know, the only day the British Parliament is full is Wednesdays, Prime Minister's questions. The rest of the week it's empty, it's completely empty. Because they know there's no point. I mean, there's absolutely no point in discussing stuff. The only reason they're all there on a Wednesday is because the cameras are there. Here's another statement from the Irish press, just making sure that the people understand that their politicians knew what was occurring. Nobody in the political system can argue they weren't warned about the possible extent of problems facing the country. And so you start to understand why it is that Brian Cowen, you know, is quite seeking solace by just going out and getting wasted. Now, these guys driving this agenda believe that they have three very powerful tools at their disposal to carry out their agenda. And the first tool that they work on is apathy. Because they believe if they can drive the population into apathy, then they can pursue their agenda without opposition. The most powerful tool in their occult belief system is abdication. Because by definition, abdication means that we know what's happening, but we take a conscious decision to do nothing. And they believe that that is the most powerful tool that they have. And then, of course, there's willful ignorance. And they're working on the basis that 13% of people will know what they're doing. And that's a number, by the way, that excuse me, that's a number that John Coleman, Dr. John Coleman, came up with in his Committee of 300 book, which he wrote in 1986, updated and republished in 2006. And Dr. John Coleman made the observation that the Olympians, the inner sanctum, acknowledged that there are 13% of the general population who are smart enough, astute enough, aware enough, awake enough to know what they're doing. But it's not enough. And those 13% must never be allowed to make connection with each other. But thanks to the internet, you know, we're having the opportunity to connect. And I mean, even just a few years ago, it would have been unthinkable that we'd have had this number at a meeting of this ilk, and particularly perhaps not on a Friday evening. So it's indicative that people are starting to be aware and starting to take the interest in what's occurring. Now, when the anticipated reaction of the people who aren't aware occurs, when they start to be aware, this is going to be the safety valve. Now, the French are rising, but you know, the French riot anyway, it's a national pastime. So, you know, they'll get it out of their system, and everyone in France knows that the French don't riot when it's cold, so, you know, they've got another few weeks to go and then it'll calm down. But here, in the other countries, of course, it's been going on in Greece for a while, unreported. And, you know, it's been going on in Spain, unreported, Italy, unreported. And I'm sure when, you know, the people of the Republic realise the magnitude of what's occurring, then, you know, and many of them may well go and hit the streets. But this is not for us to do. This is not for us to do. But, you know, we may need to take some preparations, because there is a possibility, is a very strong possibility, that in the coming weeks and months, as this spreads across Europe, we may see a breakdown of society as we know it. So, you know, we need to think about taking precautions and making sure we've got access to things like food and water in the short term. You know, food. I keep a supply of what I estimate to be about 3 months of essentials, just in case. Food, water, loo rolls, matches, you know, the essentials that you're going to need. So if I want to shut my front door for 3 months while all this crap is going on, then I can do so. But I have tremendous confidence in humanity, you know, and people know that, or people may have to get it out of their system, but after a while people realise that, you know, just hitting the streets and rioting ain't exactly moving forward. So eventually, you know, communities will start to pull together. Or communities will start to re-establish some kind of social order. But, you know, there are other ways. This doesn't have to happen. And let me introduce you to an Asian country that has a completely different way of getting its government to respond to the will of the people. And this is South Korea. Because in South Korea, and it takes a lot for the South Koreans to go and hit the streets, but when they do hit the streets, they go in numbers. Now this is a protest that took place a couple of years ago. But when the South Koreans go, they go there on a mission. And that's what it looked like on the first day of the protest. That's what it looked like at night. That's what it looked like on the second day of the protest. That's what it looked like on the second night. And the third day, and the third night, and so on for 7 days. And do you know what this protest was all about, excluding those who attended my presentation last night? Do you know what this protest was all about? The importation of growth hormone contaminated beef. The World Trade Organization was putting pressure on the South Korean government to import growth hormone contaminated beef. And the people of South Korea said, we don't want your growth hormone, we don't want your modified foodstuffs, until they hit the streets. And in the end the government went back to the World Trade Organization and said, well, thank you very much, you've crippled our country. And there was effectively a Mexican standoff, a Korean standoff. So there was an agreement that Korea would pay a nominal fine to the World Trade Organization for not importing growth hormone contaminated beef, and the people went home. So, you know, unfortunately in the West, generally a riot occurs and people let off steam and then they go home. Or a protest occurs, everybody turns up on a weekend, on a Saturday, no politicians or no bureaucrats are working. The only people who get a benefit from the protest are the transport companies for shipping people there, the food companies for keeping them fed and watered, and the police for the overtime and the riot training. Nobody else gives a damn. So, just maybe the South Korean model is something that needs to be considered in terms of getting a message across. And the message is important. I mean, it's really, really important. One of the reasons I do what I do is because I have a range of kids. The oldest is 31 and the youngest is nearly 8. And, I had 20 years in the oil industry. I was 34 before I even had cause to question orthodox reality. It took me a long time to integrate what I was seeing, what I was experiencing. 9/11 was my line in the sand. But my concern is, what are we leaving our kids? I mean, we've been told, The Independent told us categorically in that article that we're leaving our kids potentially a tax debt of £200,000 over their lifetime. I told my daughter, stay in Mozambique, earn £700 a month. She can live in Mozambique on £300 a month. All the other money has to go into her savings, because if she wants to come home, it's the flight ticket and then the spending money she has when she comes home. But she can live out there on £300. And she is far happier doing that than trying to come back to the UK and trying to integrate into some career here. Woodrow Wilson said some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organised, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. But there are only a few. There are only a few. By definition, they are the few. We are the masses. It's about time that they realise that the masses can function as one. This is the last statement I'm going to give you from that document. I'll tell you what it is. We will focus their attention towards money and material goods so they may never connect with their inner self. Now this is very similar to a statement that Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote in his book Between Two Ages, The Technocratic Era. When he wrote 40 years ago, he said, one of the greatest challenges for Western governments in the coming years is to keep their people locked into consumerist materialism, preventing them from realising who they truly are. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, just a few months ago now, May the 15th of this year, in a speech to the Council on Foreign Relations, made the observation, he said, the biggest obstacle to the establishment of a one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. So 40 years ago, he was writing about the spiritual awakening. And 6 months ago, he was writing or talking about the political awakening. The combination of the political awakening with the spiritual awakening scares the crap out of the inner sanctum. And that's why they're accelerating their agenda. Now, in the run-up to 9/11, I was actually in Central America researching Mayan mythology and cosmology, because in addition, in parallel with my research in deep geopolitics, I also have a very deep interest in the philosophy and the wisdom and the knowledge of indigenous peoples. And so I was in Central America for 5 months, in the 5 months actually prior to 9/11, researching Mayan mythology and Mayan cosmology. But earlier this year, I was in Peru. It was a trip that I planned last October. And the reason I wanted to go to Peru was because I wanted to spend some time with a group of people there known as the Laika. And it's a part of the Quero tribe. And the reason that I wanted to spend some time with these people, because these people have been lost to the world for 400 years. Because they had been chased into the high Andes by the conquistadors in the early 16th century. And everybody in Peru assumed they'd been murdered, they'd been killed, because the conquistadors returned, but these guys didn't. But they weren't killed, they weren't murdered, they were living at 16,500 feet in the high Andes. And they returned in the 1960s. The reason they returned was because they wanted to share the wisdom, the knowledge, and the prophecy that they believed that they had held, and they believed that now was the time that it needed to be returned to what they called the lower world. Just before I tell you about my experiences with the Quero, briefly, this document that I've been referring to is called the Secret Covenant. The Secret Covenant. It appeared on a website, a financial website called bankindex.com on the 21st of June 2002. Nobody knows its source. Well, nobody's admitting to knowing its source. That's why it's dismissed often as a forgery. But as time goes on, it's more and more difficult to dismiss it as a forgery, because as you read it, you will see that everything that's in this document is actually occurring. So this is the guys. They're very easily identifiable from their very colourful ponchos and hats. But actually, they're not revered by all of Peru. And in fact, the Holy Office, which is of course the modern day version of the Inquisition, actually maintains a remote office in Lima, specifically to try and make sure that the Catholic population does not embrace any of the knowledge and the wisdom and the insights and the philosophy of these guys here. So I had read a lot about these guys. I'd read a lot from the anthropologists who had spent the time with them. But I wanted to hear it for myself. I wanted to spend the time there and hear what it was they had to say. And one of their key prophecies is that humanity has been living on the planet out of balance with nature. Now, this sounded very much like something straight off the Georgia Guidestones, which again I encourage you to go look at, Georgia Guidestones, because the first statement on the Georgia Guidestones says, maintain humanity under 500 million in balance with nature. So these guys basically saying the same thing, but they were saying that it's not going to be something that is controlled by humanity. It's something that's going to be brought about by much greater forces, and it's going to be brought about because humanity has effectively been raping the earth, been taking far more than it needs. Now, nobody knows that more than me, because we have a hydrocarbons infrastructure that takes 90 million barrels of oil a day out of the natural resources of the planet. Now, in the first instance, there are alternatives to oil, but in the more important instance, we don't need to consume 95 million barrels a day. The technology is there that we could reduce that to certainly half, and probably even less than that. Why do you think you're still driving around in vehicles that only give you 30 miles a gallon or 35 miles a gallon? The same as it was 30, 40 years ago. The technology exists to give greater mileage, but we have an infrastructure. We have a hydrocarbon infrastructure on the planet that produces 90 million barrels a day, so we have to sell 90 million barrels a day. And also, because of taxation, governments need you to buy oil so that you can pay 72 pence tax on every litre of fuel that you buy. This is called a closed economy. So we're raping the planet, and these guys are saying, you know, we don't have to do it. So I said, why did you come out of the mountains to tell us this? Why didn't you stay up in the mountains to wait for it to happen, and then you could have enjoyed a much less populated planet? And they said, no, you don't understand, it's prophecy. Well, then we got into the discussion about the word prophecy, and what I realized they were saying is, it's a prophecy, it doesn't have to happen. The fact that it's a prophecy, it's a heads up, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do something different to prevent it from occurring. So they made the observation, they were saying that basically what we have to do is we have to do two things. We have to take physical action. We have to do what we can to bring about a change in the way in which we live our lives on the planet, the way in which we function as a society. Consumerist materialism has reached the point where it is no longer sustainable in any way, shape or form. We need to do something different. Now, all of you in the room will probably embrace that in one way, shape or form. Of course, we might all have different views on how we go about it, but we probably all embrace the fundamental of that principle, that we need to be doing something different. Well, these guys have a really interesting take on what's going to happen in the next few years, because I said, so, you know, how is this going to come about? And they said, well, people will naturally realize this, because there is an event that these guys claim to have known about for generations that is scheduled to occur, that will actually change the whole way in which we relate to reality. It will change our whole balance of perception. And I said, oh, this is interesting. I said, how is that going to happen? And they said, solar flares, solar storms. I knew from other research that the solar storms, solar activity is due to reach a peak, and a peak unknown in recorded time, in the middle of 2012. And what these guys are saying is that these solar storms are actually going to awaken and trigger what we have been told is junk DNA. Because these guys believe that this was DNA that was shut down millennia ago, and we are on the brink of having an opportunity to return to who we truly are. Now, that sounds familiar because that was what was written in the secret doctrine. Prevent us from realizing who we truly are. These guys are saying that there's going to be a natural, universal event that gives us an opportunity to open up to completely new bounds of perception. But they say that, you know, we can't just sit back and wait for this. You know, we have to take some positive action. We have to start demonstrating that we want to do things differently. But they also make another observation. They said it's not enough just to make the physical changes. We've also got to start, and their word is dream. We've got to start to dream the type of future that we want. And then we got into some discussion, and I realised that in terms of my interpretation, what they're really saying is we need to visualise. We actually need to start visualising the type of future that we want to see, as opposed to being so caught up in the day-to-day existence that we are just literally following the same old routine, day in, day out, reading the same bullshit in the paper, watching the same bullshit programs on the TV. We actually have to do something different and visualise, take the opportunity to contemplate, to reflect, and to move forward. Now, Jim's using different terminology, but Jim ends his presentation by saying, that he believes in the power of prayer. Really, we're using different terminology, but perhaps we're saying fundamentally the same thing. And I've been giving this insight, sharing this insight, the insights of Quero, to audiences for, ever since I came back from Peru. And people will have different belief systems, different philosophies, but they can all embrace this concept. So, the reason I wanted to go there, by the way, is because I was aware that this awakening process was occurring, because I've been giving public talks on these subjects now for over 7 years, and I've seen the audiences grow on an increasing basis, exponentially. So something was happening. Something was triggering an increased awareness, and it is still growing exponentially. So I came up with the term Homo luminous, you see, but I Googled it because I also know that I don't have an original idea in my head, because the moment I think I've come up with something original, all I've got to do is Google it and I can find it's already there, and somebody else came up with it a long time ago. But that was when I stumbled across a guy called Alberto Bellodo, and he's the anthropologist who's been working with these guys for 40 years. So it was actually Alberto Bellodo that I went out to Peru with, to spend time with these guys. Now, let me just make the observation that, you know, what these, I'm not suggesting for one moment that these guys have absolutely got it right. It might be a complete load of tosh. But on the other hand, you know, we are in a situation right now where what we've got is completely and utterly unsustainable. If things carry on the way they are, we and future generations are going to be living our lives in absolute abject slavery. I mean, you know, when Macmillan in 1958 said, you know what, the people don't appreciate it, they've never had it so good, I think he was bloody well right. Because back in 1958, a family could survive on a single wage. A single wage of a working man in a normal job, working 40 hours, no overtime. My mother never worked. My father was a lift engineer, working for the Greater London Council. He never did overtime. He was very much into youth work. That was his pastime. My mother never... The only time my mother started working was when I and my sister both left home, and that's because she was bored. So, and we could have 2 weeks holiday every year. Okay, we didn't go to Spain, we went to Clacton, but apart from that, you know, we had a reasonable life. That's not possible today. It's not possible for a family to exist on a single wage. You've got both partners working, and in many cases, both partners have got 2 jobs or more. And this is not the legacy that I want to leave to my kids. So, you know, the reality is, for everybody, you know, it really is time to wake up. And the mission, I believe, that we all have, because, you know, you've all got some awareness of what's occurring, otherwise you wouldn't be here tonight. Our challenge is to share it. Not everybody's ready to hear it yet, that's for sure. And that's why, you know, we put ourselves up for ridicule, you know, when we try and broach these subjects. But the reality is that more and more and more people, look at the response. Go Google the Sean Doherty Highland Radio page on Facebook. Sean Doherty tried to marginalise Jim in the first instance, and then later in the interview myself. And, you know, okay, we managed to sort of give as good as we got eventually. We learned from it too. But go look at the responses. Go look at the responses, because during that radio interview, Sean Doherty said, look, all of the comments that are coming in, they're all negative. Well, we know that was a lie anyway, because we've seen the comments that were positive. He said all the comments are negative, and that was what he was putting out on air. But all the comments on the Highland Radio Sean Doherty Facebook page, the vast majority of comments, and I mean, when I say vast majority, I'm talking 70% plus, are all supportive of what Jim and I were saying. So we know that, you know, basically people are ready to hear this message, and, you know, we can't do it alone. We don't intend to do it alone. It needs everybody really to do as much as they possibly can in whatever way they can to share that message. So, you know, to take my Quero friend's advice, you know, it's time to wake up, take action, and to dream our future. And I'm going to end with a quote that I've been using for 5 years in my presentations now. It's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, the second century. And I believe that this quote is more pertinent and more important today than it was nearly 2 millennia ago when Marcus Aurelius offered it. And that is, what we do in life ripples through eternity. Thank you for coming on this evening.
Do a question and answer session very shortly, but you have to agree that was a A1 presentation. That should really make you go and tell your friends and try and waken people up and share the information. I advise everybody to go on Facebook, because the people that are afraid to go on Facebook in case they, you know, they get ridiculed or put up personal things. Well, don't put up personal things. Don't say you're going to go to Spain for a week and someone robs your house. Don't say I'm going for a pint. Now, don't do that rubbish. Use it as an information highway. They pass the message, and even put up, you know, YouTube videos of Ian and stuff like that. Post things up all the time. That's what I do. Post it up, get the message out. The only way we're going to change is if we change the hearts and minds of people. We get inside people's heads. So it's just telling the truth. And the truth is not an agenda. There's no political agenda here. The truth cannot be argued with. It stands alone. You know, it's just no one can argue with the truth once you put it out there. People will ridicule you because you're going against the norm. What is normal, you know? So we've got to wake up to the truths and see through the illusion that the banksters are putting out, that the government who back the banksters are putting out, that they control the media, and right through the media, radio, everything. You're being bombarded because they're panicking. Because we are waking up, they're really panicking, and they've got to bombard you, bombard your senses. That's where you're going to get opposition. You're going to get people come up and tell you you're nuts, you're mad, you're this, you're that. There's these guys have been called out as well, you know. But they're sticking their neck out and getting this message across. And the next time you come back, we hope you have double the amount of people here. Why? Because you're going to go and tell people, and that's the idea. We've got to wake up and fast before it's too late. Okay, we're going to do a question and answer now. So anybody has any questions? The two gentlemen will be one. Go ahead, sir.